The hint of where the pockets are, they tend to be on the outsides. But then again, I'll tell you to cuddle, so that doesn't really work too well. We are going through these 9 things called the fruits of the Spirit, and we're almost done. We're getting through them, and every week I've given sort of a caveat at the beginning of the message, because here's the thing: I'm human, you're human. These things are incredibly daunting. We look at this list: love and joy and peace and patience, and you go down this list, and if you recognize your humanness, you're bound to say, I have none of these, and none of these are growing in my life, so therefore I must be in big trouble. So I need to work harder. I haven't been to church in a while, or I haven't prayed enough, or something like that. Here's the problem. We tend to think of these as fruits of ourselves, rather than what Paul calls them in Galatians, which are fruits of the Spirit. And that's an important, really, really important distinction, because what it means is these are not done by our works. We don't achieve these. We don't accomplish them. You can think, that's why they're called fruits. Think of a tree. A tree does not squeeze really hard and push out an apple. It doesn't do that. If you went to an apple tree in the middle of winter and you said, produce for me an apple, the apple tree would look at you, and if it could talk, it would say, you're an idiot. It's wintertime. I can't just push an apple out of my core. No, you know what goes into making the apples? It's photosynthesis, it's the light, it's the water, it's a lot of other elements outside of that tree that are coming together inside the tree and then producing that fruit. The reason why this is important is because it's easy to get trapped up in, I've got to do these things, I've got to master these 9. It's not about you. And if you're having trouble with any of these 9, perhaps it's because you've forgotten that one prepositional phrase that Paul gives us of the Spirit. You've forgotten that these are fruits of something supernatural, something outside of yourself that you need to allow to work inside of you. One commentator says, therefore they are not the fruits of free will, but only as far forth as our will is made free by grace. He says, listen, this is not about your will. This is not about willpower. It's about letting the Spirit come into your life. And, here, frankly, we don't really talk about the Holy Spirit a lot. I know that. We talk about God, we talk about Jesus, but the Holy Spirit, we kind of keep that a little hush-hush. But these are fruits of the Spirit, and therefore you have to let something of the Spirit come into you. And if you're having trouble with any of these, you can pray that prayer. Pray, Holy Spirit, it's not about me. It's not my will or works. It's you that comes inside of me and changes me from the inside. Okay, I had to give that caveat before we get into the message here today. Today we're looking at one that is perhaps the hardest to preach on or to teach on: goodness and faithfulness. Because when you say these words, goodness and faithfulness, if you say somebody is good or they're faithful, I don't know for you, but for me the image almost pops into my mind of someone in the front row praying, almost with angelic beings flying around them, very pious, very good person, a very faithful person. And that's not at all what Paul means by these words. Let me do a little definition first, and then I'll explain what I mean. And first of all, why am I taking these 2 together? It's not because I'm getting lazy and I want to get the series over with quicker. These 2 are intricately linked together. And almost every commentator puts them together, and here's why. Because of their root definitions, and they're very, very similar in nature. And here's what I mean. I criticize English all the time up here, because the English language is pretty limited in a lot of respects, and we cannot capture what these words actually mean. I'm going to redefine them for you. Goodness, in the biblical sense, it's a Greek word where we get the English name Agatha. It's agathos, and what it means is it's not just being good and nice. It's so much deeper than that. Actually, the better term, and I put this in your outline, would be to say a disposition towards serving and doing good to others. It's a disposition. It's a character trait. It's about your character. And if your character is deep, it's not about the niceties on the surface. It's not about saying, oh, you look good today. That's not goodness in the biblical sense. It's much deeper than that. It's a disposition towards goodness. It's a disposition towards wanting the best and the good for others. And at the same time, faithfulness, when you first read that, you say, well, that means that I have to be faithful to God. Okay, the pastor's going to tell me that I need to be faithful to God. I get it. No. That's not how Paul uses this word. When he gives the fruits of the Spirit, it's almost, the retranslation would be fidelity to others. See, both of these terms, goodness and faithfulness, they're about how you and I serve and love others, how we have a disposition towards good to others, how we have a disposition, a character trait that's faithful to others. It's about our character. Do you see this now? Not simply our actions, but how we're rooted down in our character. They both have they're linked to our character, and it's a word I'm going to use today. These two, if you have them, it means that you have integrity. Integrity. Now, what is integrity? If you know your Latin, some of you may do, some of you are language pros, integrity is closely related to the word integer. It actually comes from the Latin intangere, means untouched. An integer, if some of you are math pros too, an integer, of course, is what? A whole number. It's not a fraction. It's a whole number. And in the same way, integrity for you and me is a sense of wholeness in our lives. It's consistency. It's deep-rooted character. Integrity is a wholeness. It's not a fraction. It means if you have integrity, if you have goodness and faithfulness, as we'll see how Paul defines them today, it means you're a person of integrity, and that means that you are the same in public as you are in private. You're the same among friends as you are among your enemies. You're the same at work as you are at home. See, goodness and faithfulness are character traits, and they're talking about integrity. And Paul today wants us to see what it means to be people of integrity. He wants us to see the goodness of integrity, the faithfulness of integrity. Do we want to be people of high integrity? And here's what I mean when I say you're the same at all times. When I say you're whole, I know you're like, what does that really mean? Integer, okay, why is he talking about math now? Okay, I got you. Here, I'm going to be real practical for you. Okay, here's how I'm going to illustrate this. I wrote down most of your names that I have in a bucket today, and I took out one of your names, okay? So one of your names is here. And as you know, we have a camera here at the church, and it's a nice portable camera, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off this name, and you're going to be the lucky one. Tomorrow morning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, wherever you work or go to school or whatever you do, I'm going to meet you there in the morning, okay? So the lucky person, meet you there. And all I'm going to do is record you for the whole day. Okay, I'm going to just videotape you, I'll follow you around, so it'll be nice. It'll be like an investigative journalism thing. I'm going to record every interaction you have, every promise you make to somebody, everything you say to people. I'll record it. And at the end of the day, what we'll do is we'll watch it together. It'll be fun, right? Okay, now you're curious whose name is here, right? Look, it's up there. The camera's ready to go. And the name of the person is, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that, people. Now, why did I say that? Because I started to see some of you squirm. Some of you started squirming a little bit, and rightfully so. Because if somebody was to follow, I'm not going to follow you around the camera, but if somebody were to do that, and if somebody were to record everything you said and every promise you made during the day, and every little white lie that you said, and every little fracture of the truth, do you think you could stand up to that? See, integrity is the wholeness of it. Let me give a real practical example too. I record myself every Sunday morning, and probably 4 or 5 people watch it on YouTube. Okay, fine. But of those 4 or 5, I know that one day, somebody's going to take issue with what I said and point out a factual mistake that I've made. And see, I've got to be the same on camera as I am off camera. And it's the same in our lives. To have integrity means to be the same, to be whole, to be an integer, not a fraction. And Paul wants us to do that today. Do you want integrity today? Do you want to be people of integrity? Let's look at this then. And Paul, he doesn't actually use the words in Ephesians 4. If you have the text, please keep it open as we follow along, because we have to dig just a little bit today, but it's there, and it's juicy, and it's great. It's awesome. Watch this. First, we're going to learn about the goodness of integrity. Secondly, the faithfulness of integrity. And third, the embodiment of integrity. The goodness, the faithfulness, and the embodiment. First, the goodness. You notice here he says, to speak truth in love with one another. This is incredibly important. He's giving advice to these people, Christians, who are trying to get along with one another. And if you want to know what goodness is, remember I defined it as a disposition towards doing good and serving others. Paul says if you want to do that, you're going to have to speak truth in love to people. Now, why is that important? Because there's a lot of us in this room who are very, very good at one or the other. There's many people in this room who love to speak truth to people. We love it. We love to tell people how wrong they are. We love to correct people. We love to fix them. We love the truth component. But those people who love to speak truth don't do it with love. On the other hand, there's many of us in this room who love to speak love without truth. Any one of these that you do is not demonstrating goodness. It's not being an integer. It's not being a whole person to the other person. It's not having a disposition towards goodness. See, listen, if you speak truth without love to someone, that's harshness or revenge. You're trying to get at them. You're trying to fix them. Show them where they went wrong. See, truth without love is just harshness or revenge. But on the other hand, love without truth, that's cowardice. Do you know why people speak love without the truth of other in their lives? It's because they so do not want confrontation. They don't want that person to walk away. They don't want that person to be out of their life. They'd rather speak all loving words and no truthful words. But here's the problem with that. If you're good at speaking truth without love, or if you're good at speaking love without truth, you're not treating the other person with goodness. You're not having a disposition towards goodness. What you're doing to them is lying to them. See, speaking truth without love, you think it's the truth, but that's a lie. And why? Because you're not giving them the whole story of how much you love them. You're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you. If you speak love without truth, what are you doing? You're doing that for you again. You're lying to them. Why? To keep them and to protect yourself. See, a lot of people don't have a problem with lying, and I understand. You know, we do it every day. I read a Notre Dame psychologist. She did a study over, I'm blanking on it, 10 or so years, an in-depth study where she found that, and this is an interesting fact, she said that when people first met each other, the first interaction, if it lasted longer than 10 minutes, there were at least 3 lies told. Can you imagine that? The first time people met, if it lasted more than 10 minutes, the dialogue, they would lie 3 times. And she estimated, she had a study saying that of the people who came in and took polygraph tests and talked about their past habits in lying, she said minimum people had 10 lies per day. And maximum 200. 10 minimum, maximum 200. 3 when you first meet the person. Why? Why? Because lies are present every moment of our lives. Little white lies, little fibs, little alterings of the truth. Truth without love, love without truth. It's a lie, but you know what you're doing? You know what I'm doing and what we do when we lie to somebody? We don't just hurt ourselves. What we're doing is misrepresenting reality to that person. We're not giving them the full picture of reality. It's almost like putting a veil over their eyes. And if you want a perfect illustration of this, just go back to Genesis. Go back to Genesis 3. What is the first problem? The first problem is the lie. Satan, the serpent, tells Adam and Eve, listen, you know all that stuff God said, it's not really true. What is he doing? He's misrepresenting reality to them. He's speaking almost in his way of love to try to win them over, but without the truth. Paul says, listen, and remember last week we said kindness, he says, be angry, but don't sin. This week he says, listen, I want you to speak truth to people. Tell them what they need to fix in their life. But when you do that, why are you doing it? What's your motivation? Do you just want to unload the truth and nail them down and drop a bomb on them? Or do you want to just hold them and hug them and not give them any truth at all? He says, no, first of all, if you want to know the goodness of integrity, it's to speak the truth with love. You can't separate them. Otherwise, it's the same thing as lying and misrepresenting reality to them. But that's not all. See, that's the goodness of it. You want to be good to other people? You want to start being good? Every interaction you have with somebody, start asking yourself, am I doing both of these at the same time? Am I speaking to them truthfully and lovingly to better them rather than just protect myself? But that's not it. Paul goes a little further, and he gives this very interesting metaphor, and you can look back into your passage, about the body. And what he's trying to communicate here is what we term faithfulness. And it's having, like I said, having fidelity towards another person. Being true to them. See, the first component of being good is speaking truth with love and love with truth. The second component is being faithful to other people and having fidelity, having deep integrity. Now, what does this look like? This is a weird, I just remembered this popped into my head. This baseball player was talking, he was a pitcher a few years back, and he had just torn his rotator cuff, which you know is part of the shoulder. You guys know this, right? Head nods. A pitcher, of course, when they tear their rotator cuff, they pretty much end their career. And I remember he was giving, I don't think it was a post-game interview, it was probably a couple weeks later, and he was talking, and he said something very interesting, which actually speaks to this body metaphor that Paul says. He said, well, my shoulder wasn't faithful to my body. He says, that's how it got torn. When it got torn, it wasn't faithful to my body. And I thought, that's a very weird thing to say, like to blame your shoulder for what it did and say it wasn't being faithful to the body. But see, that's what Paul's getting at here. If you and I want to be people of integrity, you're going to have to look, and you can do this right now if you want. You can look to the person next to you. You can do it. You're going to be faithful to them, but what that means is that you're in the body, Paul says. We are members of one, connected by ligaments, he says. Literally, he's giving this really deep metaphor, really, really poignant and detailed. And he says, listen, don't you know that you're connected to somebody by ligaments? And you have to be faithful to that person. Otherwise, the whole body gets dismembered. The pitcher says, my shoulder wasn't faithful to my body because it got torn. It was ripped apart. And listen, when you and I are not faithful to one another in this community, we tear at that ligament. Now, what does it mean to be faithful to one another? It means that you and I, if we're faithful to one another, if we want to promote the fidelity and have integrity, it means that we are promise makers and promise keepers. We're deep promise makers to one another. I look at your life and I say, listen, I promise to be with you even if, and most often when, you don't reciprocate it to me. We make deep promises to one another, but we keep those promises. And I'm talking about promises of vulnerability, promises of transparency, promises of being there for one another. And in our culture, and this goes for East and West, this is incredibly difficult for us to do. It's incredibly difficult for you to look to other people, especially as you look just now to each other, and maybe a complete stranger. Can you look at their life and say, listen, I promise, no matter what you do, I will never leave. I promise to get involved into your life. I promise to serve you. I promise to keep you and to hold you, even if you never, ever, ever reciprocate it. And that is a very scary thing to say to someone. Why? It's because, this is how I most often term it, you probably heard me say this before, most of our relationships, work something like a contract. Most of our relationships, even our marriages to some extent, most of them work like a contract. What is a contract? It's where you and I look at each other and say, listen, I'll uphold my end of the bargain as a friend if you uphold your end of the bargain. See, that's a contract. Two people making a deal with each other. But the minute you break your side, it's over. I'll live up to my end of the bargain. I'll be your friend. I'll be there for you in Christian community. But the minute you wrong me, the contract is null and void. And this is why promises scare us. And this is why making promises about each other in our lives and saying, I will be there for you, even if you never reciprocate it 1 ounce, I will always be there with you. That deep level of promise, that's faithfulness, that's fidelity, that's integrity. Now, promises scare us, I know. But there's something in a promise that if you make a promise to another person, that undoes all that contractual nonsense. Let me read you something written by a guy named Lewis Smedes, who is theological mentor of mine. He wrote a great book called Mere Morality, and he spends time talking about the Ten Commandments. It's a great read, but he has a section in there where he talks about promises. And he talks about the impact and the beauty of promises. He's really nailing home the marriage promise that you make, which is probably the greatest promise you'll ever make, the vow that you make to the spouse. But here's what he says about promises that is really still true for the Christian community. He says, when I make a promise, I bear witness that my future with you is not locked into a bionic beam by which I was stuck with the fateful combination of X's and Y's in the hand I was dealt out of my parents' genetic deck. Keep in mind, he's a theologian. He gets a little wordy. That's why I put the quote in your bulletin. You can reread it if you want. When I make a promise, he says, I testify that I was not routed along some unalterable itinerary by the psychic conditioning visited on me by my slightly wacky parents. When I make a promise, I declare that my future with people who depend on me is not predetermined by the mixed-up culture of my tender years. I am not fated, he says. I am not determined. I am not a lump of human dough, whipped into shape by the contingent reinforcement and aversive conditioning of my past. When I make a promise, he says, to anyone, I rise above all the conditioning that limits me. No German shepherd ever promised to be there for me. No computer ever promised to be loyal for life. Only a person can make a promise. And when he does, he is most free. See what he's saying here? A German shepherd can't make you a promise. A computer can't make you a promise. Promises are distinctly human. And he says to be human is to make promises to one another. It's to rise above your culture, your conditioning. It's to look at one another and say, listen, I will be faithful to you to the end. I will not leave even if you push me. I want what's good for you, so I will be faithful to you. Now, can you make that kind of promise? It's a small group today. Can you look at each other and make that promise? I know some of you made it to your spouses. Can you make it to a complete stranger? That's Christian integrity. That's Christian faithfulness. And it's not possible on your own. Every week now, I've jokingly said, now let's pray, and we can end. And a lot of you have been very happy when I said that because you think the sermon's over and it's time to go home. I can't do that for you. I can't end it right there. I just can't. I'm sorry. You got to bear with me a couple more minutes here. Because if I left it there, good luck. You go be good like that. You go be faithful like that. You and I will probably fail before we get down the stairs. Minimum 10 lies every day, maximum 200. How many do you tell? How many fibs and articulations of the truth? How much faithfulness? How many times do you betray people or just give up on them and say, I'm tired of this, I'm done? Do you want the supernatural power to be rooted in integrity, rooted in goodness and faithfulness? In order to do it, you and I need to see it embodied. You and I need to see integrity worked out. Not just as an example, but as a power. And let me give you the example, and then I'll give you the power. In John 18, if you ever look at John 18, I didn't notice this, I haven't noticed this in a long time. In the book of John, chapter 18, Jesus goes on trial. But he goes on 2 trials. And in the first trial, the high priest says to him, I'm paraphrasing, he says, are you who they say you are? Are you really this Messiah? And you know what he says? He says, yes, here's the truth. And the high priest smacks him. Then the next trial, he goes before Pilate, and Pilate says, are you really who they say they are? And then Jesus says, yes, I testify to the truth. Both times, he's the same. The first time he gets slapped, the second time he gets killed. Do you see that in the ultimate moment of crisis, when his life is on the line, when he has every right to fib a little bit, to lie, to back out, to cover up, to break his faithfulness, he shows utter integrity. In the face of adversity, in the face of his death, he is integrity. He is the same in front of the high priest. He is the same in front of Pilate, and he knows what it's going to get him. See, you may have to tell the truth to somebody that you don't want to tell that truth, and it may hurt your relationship. He spoke the truth, and it killed him. He was integrity. And you know why he was integrity? For you. and you and you and me. Jesus says, I will not change with the seasons, because the cost of your life is so infinitely valuable to him that he shows the greatest act of integrity by going to his death so that you can show integrity now. Listen, why do we lie? It's because deep down we fear something. You know, we're like little children who get caught with our hand in the cookie jar, and we lie about it. Why? Because we don't want people to know that we had our hand in the cookie jar. That's where lies come from, fear. And Jesus says, look, all fear is gone. Cast it out. I did to the cross for you. I was integrity unto death for you, so that you never have to fear anything. And you never have to lie to cover. Because Jesus was uncovered for you. The cross brings together truth and love. Because you know what the cross says? The cross says to you and me, the truth is we are petty, selfish, broken, needy, lost. We are utterly self-centered. We are wrapped up in ourselves. We lie, we cover, we fib, we do everything we can do to promote our own self-interest. We seek power first for ourselves. That's what the truth of the cross says. But the love of the cross says he lost power for us. He lost his very life for us. That's truth, and that's love going hand in hand, and that's faithfulness to go to the cross. Let me give it another way, a silly way. If what I just said to you about Jesus being integrity laid out on a cross for you so that you never have to fear being uncovered yourself. You can speak utter truth to people and you can give them utter love because you had truth and love given to you first. If that doesn't shake you and melt you down to your toes, if that doesn't make your toes tingle right now, let me give a silly illustration of this. My 3.5-year-old, I make her make promises to me. I say things like, will you promise you won't cry? You promise you won't beat that kid up at school? You promise you won't do this? You promise you won't do that? Now, how do I seal that promise? She can't write her name. She can't even pinky swear. She doesn't have opposable. She has opposable pinkies. She's not a monkey, but she can't do the pinky thing, swearing thing. How do I seal that? You know how I seal that promise? It's a little stupid thing that I do where I ask her to come up to me and give me what I call a promise kiss on my right cheek. A promise kiss. And you know what that means? Is because if I catch her breaking the promise, then I can say, do you remember the promise kiss? And instantly she has a tangible reminder of what she signed over. She remembers that promise kiss, and she doesn't always fix her, but then she knows that something's wrong and something's broken, and she has to go back and change her behavior. Listen, do you not see that God gave you the promise kiss? And it's on the cross. See, when I ask my little 3-year-old to give me a promise kiss, it's about her performance and achievement. God gives you a promise kiss and says it's not at all about your achievements. It's about what Jesus did. The cross, the gospel. It's the greatest promise in human history because it's a promise that the God of the universe will never, ever, 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 ever leave you. He can't. Because it cost him his son to get you back. Rest on that, and you will find integrity because you see it, you felt it, you know it. Please pray with me. Heavenly Father, we're going to have some time of silence, Lord, where we can meditate on this truth. Lord, in the silence now of our hearts, teach us how the gospel is goodness lived out. Teach us how the gospel message is faithfulness, and we can hold on to it, and you will change us from the inside out. Keep us now in silence, Lord, to meditate on this reality.